All right, in this session of the listener's commentary on the book of Leviticus, we are continuing our study through Leviticus 11 through 15. That is one whole unit of thought that revolves around the topic of ritual purity. In our last session, we focused on chapter 11 and the food laws, clean and unclean foods. As we continue walking through this section, we now turn to chapters 12 through 15, which focuses on ritual purity regarding the body. And as a reminder, we need to understand that we really don't know why some of these specific issues made a person ritually unclean. And I just have to emphasize it's ritually unclean, not physically unclean, not morally unclean, ritually unclean. And some of these specific issues are a little bit of a mystery to us as to why they functioned that way. We do know the big theological rationale. That is, that this matter of ritual purity marked Israel out as a distinct people who were holy to Yahweh, holy to God. They were His unique people. And the matter of ritual purity was part of God's covenant with them. So it was a matter of being faithful to their covenant with Yahweh by living out the ritual purity instructions. So we know all that. But as to the specific reasons for each state of being, each condition, each case, as to why those things made somebody ritually impure, we just really don't know. In some places, we could conceive of some specific benefits. For example, we'll see in this section a chapter on childbirth and how that made a person ritually unclean, and what to do about that, which effectively led to a maternity leave. That's a good benefit. Or we'll see the discussion of mold in a house and what to do about that. And there's a real benefit to removing mold from a person's house. And so we can see some benefits, at least in some cases. Other cases, we're not really clear of the benefits or the reason at all. So we, to some degree, just have to accept that we don't really know any specific reason or if there were specific reasons. The key thing is this, and that is, this is how an Israelite was expected to worship God as an expression of their faithfulness to their covenant with God. That's the key thing. So here in chapters 12 through 15 that we'll look at in this recording, we now focus on ritual purity regarding the body. So we'll get childbirth in chapter 12. We'll look at ritual purity regarding various skin diseases, as well as mold and that sort of thing in the house in chapters 13 and 14. And then chapter 15 deals with ritual purity concerning bodily discharges. So chapter 12 is all about childbirth. Begins like this, chapter 12, verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, when a woman gives birth and delivers a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days, as in the days of her menstruation she shall be unclean." We'll actually look in chapter 15 about the requirements for menstrual ritual impurity. So just hold that thought. But in this case specifically, we're dealing with the birth of a little boy, and she will be ritually unclean for 7 days. Now, again, this may strike us as unusual. Here's the interesting thing. In many cultures, both ancient and modern, childbirth leads to ritual impurity. There still are cultures in the world today where that's the case. In fact, one scholar notes that this is widespread throughout human cultures throughout history. So while strikes maybe our modern sensibilities as unusual, to a lot of cultures throughout human history, this just made perfect sense for whatever reason. And so having a male child, she's unclean for 7 days. On the 8th day, verse 3, she will take the foreskin of his flesh and circumcise him. So she's going to circumcise the baby boy. And she shall stay at home in her condition of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification are completed. So the child circumcised on the 8th day, and then The mother is unclean for 7 days, but must remain away from the sanctuary or holy things for 33 days. This is the case with the birth of a little boy. But verse 5 tells us that the time is double for the birth of a little girl. Again, we don't know why that is, but verse 5 says, if she gives birth to a female child, then she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, not one, as in her menstruation, and she shall stay home from the tabernacle and all of that in her condition of blood purification for 66 days. This is one of those places where it would be nice to know why the different length of time, but the text just never tell us, and any reason we come up with are just guesses, and we need to be honest with that. Now, here's the thing, however. Any and all guesses must remember that both males and females, according to the very Torah itself in which we find these instructions, males and females are made in God's image. So this isn't because of some sort of, significant difference between little boys and little girls. It's not that at all. We just don't know the reason. For whatever reason, she's going to stay home twice as long with the little girl as with the little boy. The one thing that's noted in the text that's important for us to pay attention to is the purification or the impurity is specifically because of the blood. It is specified here as blood purification. And so it's something about a menstrual blood and something about the blood of labor and delivery that makes her ritually unclean for a specified period. Then, after the prescribed time, either 33 or 66 days, they need to bring an offering to the tabernacle for ritual purification. And so verses 6 and following says, when the days of her purification are completed, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb as a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a purification offering. And then she makes the offering so that she could be ritually pure, to make atonement for her and be cleansed from the flow of her blood. So again, you see the emphasis on the blood being the reason for the impurity. Now, we don't know exactly why that's the case. Some have suggested that menstrual type blood, as here and in the monthly period, is connected to the cycle of life and death, and perhaps that's the case. We just don't know why that is. Another thing to notice out of this section is that she brings both a burnt offering and a purification offering to make atonement. But unlike in other cases where sin is involved, there's no pronouncement of forgiveness given. Why? Well, because this isn't a moral issue. There's no sin to be forgiven. It's just a ritual purity matter. And so this is about cleansing from ritual impurity. All right, so that's chapter 12 on ritual impurity related to childbirth. The next two chapters, chapters 13 and 14 of Leviticus, focus mostly on ritual impurity with regard to defiling skin diseases. Traditionally, this has been translated as leprosy. But now that term refers exclusively to Hansen's disease, and that's not what's being talked about here in these chapters. The Hebrew term is a broad and general word for a number of skin conditions. In fact, these chapters seem to describe 7 different ones, including ones that can affect clothing and walls of houses. Now, why are such skin diseases ritually defiling? Well, once again, we just don't know for sure. Some have suggested a connection with death and point out Numbers chapter 12 that seems to make an association between a skin disease and death. And maybe, again, that's the case, but whether that's an overarching rationale, it's just not clear in the text. The Africa Bible commentary connects it with wholeness. And the reason I point that out is because there are still cultures within Africa where ritually defiling skin diseases are a thing. And so maybe they have some insight from their cultural experience. So in that commentary, they point out the connection between holiness and wholeness. And that's why, for example, there are requirements on sacrificial animals. They have to be unblemished and whole. That's why priests couldn't have any defects. And if they did, they still could enjoy the benefits of like priestly meals, but they couldn't serve in the tabernacle. Well, that makes good sense also. But again, we just don't know for sure exactly why such ritually defiling skin diseases were such an issue. Now, in these chapters, there is a concern to identify if the skin disease is communicable, that is, if it spreads. So there may be some concern as well for the continued spread of the disease. At any rate, the main concern here is to identify what type of disease it is so they know if it's one that makes a person ritually impure. And if it does, then they're told how to properly address it. So, chapter 13, verse 1 reads like this: Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When someone has on the skin of his body a swelling, or a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of his body. And there's that word leprosy that we said really is just better described as skin disease, and specifically a ritually defiling skin disease. Then he shall be brought to Aaron, the priest, or to one of his sons, the priest. The priest shall inspect it, look it over, see what the issue is, and either pronounce him clean or unclean. So verse 3 says, he's going to look at the infected area of the body, and if the hair in the infection has turned white and the infection appears to be deeper than just on the surface of the skin of his body, well, then it's a ritually defiling skin disease. He's unclean. But, verse 4, if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body and it doesn't appear to be deeper than the skin and the hair has not turned white, well, then things are a little inconclusive. We're not so sure about it. So the person's going to go into quarantine for 7 days. And then they're going to be able to re-inspect and see if they can determine whether it's ritually defiling or not. So verse 5, then the priest shall look at him on the 7th day, and if in his eyes the infection has not changed and the infection has not spread on the skin, then the priest is going to isolate him for 7 more days, check him out again on the 7th day, and if the infected area has faded and the infection has not spread on the skin, then the priest can pronounce him clean. It's just a rash. And he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the rash has spread further on the skin after he's shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he shall appear again to the priest. The priest shall look at it. If it's spread, well, then he's going to be unclean. It's a ritually defiling skin disease. So what we get is a really basic procedure. The priest examines this person with a skin issue and seeks to determine whether it's a ritually defiling skin disease or not. There are certain signs that are going to indicate the presence or the absence of a ritually defiling skin disease. So the priest makes an official pronouncement, clean or unclean, depending on what he sees in the infection. If the diagnostic is inconclusive, well, then the priest quarantines the person and waits 7 days and see what develops. And if it's still unclear, quarantines them some more. Finally, once things become clear, he makes an official pronouncement. Either the person is ritually unclean or he's not. That's the basic procedure for identifying if a skin issue is ritually defiling or not. Now, verses 9 through 44 then provide all sorts of instructions for various different kinds of skin conditions and how the priest needs to examine those and diagnose whether they're ritually pure or not. We're not going to read all those verses, but you get the idea. They come to the priest. He seeks to inspect the issue and determine whether it's ritually defiling or whether it's not ritually defiling. And so there's all different kinds of skin issues about which that's the case. Then, after we get those instructions in verses 9 through 44, then we're told what the person must do. This kind of ritual impurity from skin diseases seems to be very serious. And part of the reason for that is because it could spread and contaminate others, other people, or even other things. So here's what they need to do, verse 45. As for the person who has the ritually defiling skin disease, his clothes must be torn, the hair on his head shall be uncovered, and he shall uncover his mustache and let everyone know, unclean, unclean. So he's going to call out unclean. Verse 46 says, he shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He's unclean, and he's going to live quarantined, isolated outside the camp. There's going to be some social distancing from him, and he's going to be unclean. And again, the concern seems to be that this kind of skin disease can spread. So change their appearance, announce their uncleanness, and live outside the camp until the infection clears up. Now, there was also concern that this impurity might affect clothing. So in verses 47 through 59, we get instructions of what to do if an item of clothing has a ritual defiling infestation of some sort. So perhaps here the instructions are about maybe mold that has gotten into clothing or something of that sort. We'll even see in chapter 14 that this is a concern with walls of houses. We know from other sources that there were all sorts of concerns and superstitions about this sort of thing in the cultures around Israel in the ancient Near East. We think about this in terms of health concerns, and perhaps that was part of the reason for all these superstitions, because they could spread and they affected lots of people. But they thought about terms not primarily in terms of health concerns, but in terms of spiritual concerns, even in terms of the ideas of like omens and portents and spiritual powers that were afflicting them. So what God does in verses 47 through 59, it seems, is he demystifies it a bit and clarifies what they need to do about this infestation that's gotten into clothing in order to become ritually pure again and to be clean again and to re-engage in tabernacle worship. So verse 47 says, when a garment has a mark of leprosy on it, when it has something on it that looks sort of like the same kind of thing that gets on a skin, right? So something on the surface of the clothing that could potentially be ritually defiling. And whether it's a wool garment, linen garment, whether it's in the warp or the woof of linen or wool, whether it's in leather or any article made of leather, if the mark is greenish or reddish, right? And it lists off all these things. It's like, here's what you need to do if it's gotten into clothing. So chapter 13 really focuses on instructions about identifying whether a skin issue or something marking some clothing or some fabric or a leather bag or something like that, identifying whether that thing is ritually defiling or not. And if it is ritually defiling, here's what the person needs to do. Then chapter 14 picks up with if the skin issue clears up, what needs to happen for them to be deemed ritually pure, to be able to rejoin community, and to be able to go back to tabernacle worship. So chapter 14 focuses on the issue of cleansing after the skin issue clears up. So 14:1 says, then the Lord spoke to Moses saying, this shall be the law for the person with the defiling skin disease on the day of their cleansing. So now we're talking about how they move from having a ritually defiling skin disease to being cleansed from it. So here's what they do. There's a whole list of procedures. So first, number one, the priest will meet with this person outside the camp. Remember, they're living outside the camp. And so he will meet with him, verify that indeed it has cleaned up. So the priest goes out to him, meets with him, inspects him. Sure enough, he is healed and he's cleared up. That's the first thing he needs to do. And then number two, the priest then will gather all the supplies for his cleansing ritual. So verse 4 of chapter 14 says, then the priest shall give orders to take 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, a scarlet string, and hyssop for the one who is to be clean. So he gathers all his supplies that he needs for the cleansing ritual. Then the third step in the procedure is to perform a very specific cleansing ritual for this matter. So Leviticus 14:5 and following says, then the priest shall give orders to slaughter the one bird in an earthenware vessel over running water. Running water is the idea of spring water that the earthenware vessel now contains. So they put some spring water into this clay jar so that the blood and the water mix in the jar. As for the live bird, he's going to take it with the cedar wood and the scarlet string and the hyssop, and he's going to dip them and the live bird into the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the running water. So he's going to dip it into this water and blood mixture. Then he's going to sprinkle that 7 times on the person to be cleansed from the leprosy and pronounce that person clean. And then he shall let the live bird go free over the open field. So that's the specific cleansing ritual for being announced clean and ritually pure from a ritually defiling skin disease. Then step 4 in the procedure is the person who has had this cleansing ritual done for them is now ritually pure, and that person needs then to cleanse themselves physically. So 14:8 says, the one to be cleansed shall then wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, bathe in water, and be clean, and afterwards he shall enter back into the camp. But he's got to stay outside of his own family tent for 7 days. So now he's ritually clean. Then he becomes physically clean again, but he can't enter the house. And the reason for that is there still seems to be some concern about contaminating holy things. That is, by his proximity to any donations to offerings in the house, things designated for the tabernacle, perhaps, they could be contaminated by his presence. So he stays outside of the tent for another 7 days. Then, on the 7th day, he's going to shave off all his hair. He's going to shave the hair of his head, shave his beard, even shave his eyebrows, shave off all of his hair. He's going to wash all his clothes, bathe his body once again, and then he shall be fully clean. And all of that seems to suggest some awareness that such skin issues could be contagious. And they want to have, there's some concern for complete removal of the infection. So now he's ritually pure enough and clean enough to enter into the house. He won't defile anybody or anything in the house that's not supposed to be defiled. But he still has to finish with a purity ritual in the tabernacle. So the final step in the procedure, verse 5, is after that week, the person can go to the tabernacle, and then there is another specific ritual for atonement, so that they'll be fully ritually pure in verses 10 through 20 of Leviticus 14. And that ritual requires a guilt or restitution offering, a purification offering, and a burnt offering. These are the 3 main offerings for atonement. And so the person comes, makes these offerings for atonement. Then there's some specific actions with the blood, daubing it on their earlobe, their thumb, and their big toe, just like in the ordination of the priest, sprinkling some of the blood before the tabernacle. Then there is some anointing with oil. And all of this expresses his purification, both to him, to the community, and his consecration to the Lord. He's clean, and now he's dedicated to the Lord, and he is purified and completely ritually clean. So now he and the community know he's clean, and he can be fully reintegrated back into society and into tabernacle worship. And then, as is usual in Leviticus chapter 14, verses 21 through 32, there are instructions for poorer people who can't afford the 3 larger animals for the restitution offering, purification offering, and burnt offering. So what do they do if they can't afford those animals? So you get verses 21 through 33, instructions for them so that those poorer folks also have a means of expressing their devotion to the Lord, their desire to be ritually clean, their desire to come and be back integrated into society and into tabernacle worship. All these detailed instructions for ritual purification concerning skin diseases indicates that, for whatever reason, ritually defiling skin diseases were a major form of ritual impurity. Again, we don't know the exact reasons for that. Maybe those scholars that associate it with death based on Numbers 12, maybe that's part of it. We're not totally sure. But for whatever reason, it was a major ritual impurity, and that's why there is atonement offerings given at the end of this whole lengthy process of their cleansing. For most impurities, it's washing and waiting till evening. But in this case, there's this extended and lengthy process for their cleansing. All right, we are going to pause our study of these chapters here and save the remainder of chapters 12 through 15 concerning bodily ritual impurities for our next session. So thanks for tuning into this session of the Listener's Commentary on the Old Testament. The Listener's Commentary is a listener-supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that only exists, it's only possible because of the generosity of dozens and dozens of people just like you. So thanks a ton for your support. And if you want to join the team of supporters, you can do so by going to listenerscommentary.com, clicking the Give button in the upper right. It'll redirect you to a page, my page at World Family Mission, a registered nonprofit where you can put in a dollar amount. And if you want to make it monthly, a little box check, make this monthly. And all those donations will come this way to help this ministry continue to grow and increase so that more people can learn and live the Bible. Thanks a ton for your support.